Hello and welcome to our ValEUs Podcast series. My name is Orlov from Nazarbayev University in Astana, Kazakhstan. This podcast is part of the ValEUs project, the Jean Monnet Policy Network titled ValEUs Research and Education Network on contestation to EU foreign policy. It's founded for the Erasmus Mundus program of the European Commission for a 3-year period starting from January 2024. This ambitious project, involving 20 partner institutions from 17 countries across 5 continents, focuses on scrutinizing the foreign policy of the European Union and the challenges posed to its values. Today we are joined by colleagues from Karazin Kharkiv National University, Ruslan Zaporozhchenko, an associate professor, and Dmytro Boiko, head of political sociology department of the School of Sociology. Hello, Ruslan and Dmytro.
Hello.
Greetings.
As you suggested, we are going to discuss your recently written articles on EU values, as well as about Euroscepticism in the context of today's Ukraine. Dynamics of value orientations in post-Soviet Ukraine, factor of European integration, and the Eurosceptic discourse in candidate countries, a retrospective analysis of the Ukrainian case. Let's begin with the first one and with you, Ruslan. So can we say that European values in Ukraine have ceased to be abstract ideals and have become part of everyday practice?
So yes, to a large extent, European values in Ukraine have indeed moved from abstract political aspiration to everyday social practice, and this shift is sociologically significant because it reflects internalization rather than imitation. What has changed is not only what people declare in surveys, but how they organize collective life under conditions of uncertainty and risk and war and etc. The spread of practices such as volunteering, crowdfunding for public goods, peer-to-peer support networks, and etc., and maybe civic oversight of authorities demonstrates that norms of solidarity, responsibility, and participation have become socially expected forms of behavior, and these practices are no longer exceptional or morally heroic. They are increasingly perceived as normal, even obligatory ways of being a citizen. So critically, this transformation has taken place largely outside formal institutions and often in response to their weakness. So from a sociological perspective, this is important because it shows that European values in Ukraine have not been adopted as a result of top-down policy transfer or legal harmonization, but through lived experience, especially in moments in crisis. So war, displacement, and systematic stress have forced people to rely on horizontal trust, not only horizontal trust, also self-organization and rule-based cooperation. And in this context, values such as dignity, accountability, and solidarity are not abstract principles, as for me, but practical tools for survival and coordination. So, in this sense, European values in Ukraine function less as a borrowed ideological package and more as a social embedded moral economy. They are reproduce through everyday interactions, mutual obligations, and shared interpretations of what is fair, legitimate, and normal. So, from sociological standpoint, this bottom-up consolidation of values is more durable than formal compliance alone, because it creates a consistency that actively defends these norms, even in the absence of fully functioning institutions. So maybe this.
Mm-hmm. And what key events between 1991 and 2022 have had the strongest influence on value changes in Ukrainian society?
This is very interesting because the key events shaping value change in Ukrainian society between this period should be understood as successive disruptions of the social contract rather than isolated historical moments. Independence in 1991 dismantled the Soviet normative order without immediately replacing it, producing that several-oriented pragmatism and institutional mistrust over this years of this period. The next, the Orange Revolution in 2004 marked the first large-scale experience of civic efficacy, demonstrating that collective action could influence political outcomes, even if institutional change remained fragile. And this early experience laid the groundwork for a society that became increasingly sensitive to injustice and state failure, while altogether accumulating a repertoire of non-violent mobilization and civic self-organization. The next, the decisive transformation occurred after 2013 and 2014, when the Revolution of Dignity reframed citizenship around dignity, rights, and responsibility rather than passive loyalty. Russia's aggression from 2014 onward fused values with questions of sovereignty and security, accelerating national consolidation and embedding solidarity through volunteering and horizontal network. And also, the full-scale invasion in 2022 compressed these long-term processes into an existential moment, turning freedom, agency, and solidarity into conditions of collective survival. As a result, value change in Ukraine became not only deeper but more coherent, producing a society in which core democratic norms are more widely shared and actively defended than at any previous stage of the post-Soviet period. Yes.
As we're talking about European values, the next question would be about the limits of the European Union's ability to promote the values of democracy and solidarity beyond its institutional framework. So what are the
Yes, the EU's ability to promote democratic values and solidarity beyond its borders is inherently limited by the type of power it exercises. Unlike traditional geopolitical actors, the EU operates primarily through normative, legal, and regulatory instruments rather than coercive force. And this makes its influence highly effective in context where domestic actors already see alignment with EU standards as desirable, but much weaker where political elites lack reform insensitive or actively resist change. So conditionality remains the EU's strongest tool, yet it functions properly only when there is a credible prospect of membership or clear material benefits. So where this perspective is weak, delayed or politically consistent, maybe EU leverage diminishes and reforms tend to become superficial or selective, and maybe democratic values cannot be transferred mechanically, yes, through legislation, technical assistance, or financial support. And from a sociological perspective, values require social careers for institutions capable of enforcement, political elites willing to bind themselves to rules, and societies prepared to defend those rules when their violated. So without these elements, EU-driven reforms risk remaining symbolic or reversible. The EU's own internal challenges, yes, further complicate its role as a normative authority, and this internal contradictions weaken the EU's credibility and provide external actors with opportunities to change its value-based agenda. As a result, as for me, the EU can enable, support, and stabilize democratic transformation, but cannot replace domestic political will or compensate for the absence of societal commitment. Maybe yes, maybe this.
To what extent does the enlargement and support of Ukraine reinforce or conversely expose internal divisions within the European Union itself?
Ukraine's succession process and the scale of support, it receives concurrently strengthen and strain the European Union. On the one hand, Ukraine has become a unifying reference point that reinforces the EU's identity as a community of values facing an external threat. On the other hand, the political, economic, and security costs of long-term support expose underlying divisions between member states with different historical experience, threat perceptions, and domestic political constraints. And these disagreements are not new, but the Ukrainian case makes them more visible and more consequential. And the reliance on unanimity in key policy areas magnifies these tensions, turning individual national positions into systemic obstacles. And in this case, and in this sense, Ukraine doesn't create divisions within the European Union, but accelerates and clarifies exciting ones. I mean, yes.
What is a greater challenge for the EU today, integrating Ukraine or changing its own strategic culture?
Today, I think it's very interesting because today the greater challenge for the European Union is not the integration of Ukraine itself, but the transformation of its own strategic culture. Because we know Ukraine's accession is a complex process, yet it mainly involves technical reforms, legal harmonizations, and political negotiations, areas in which the European Union has long experience. Yes, but the more difficult issue is whether the EU is prepared to act as a genuine geopolitical and security actor. Yes, because for decades the Union has focused primarily on economic integration, regulatory power, and crisis management, maybe, while questions of deterrence, defense, and long-term security were often left for NATO and the United States. So Russia's war against Ukraine has clearly exposed these limits of this approach. So sustainable integration of Ukraine, I think, requires an EU capable of thinking in strategic and security terms. And, this includes long-term commitment rather than short-term emergency responses. Yes, collective responsibility for defense and strategic passion in a hostile international environment. So without such a shift, enlargement risks remaining a political declaration rather than a durable reality. In this sense, Ukraine's candidacy functions as a mirror for the European Union. It reveals the gap between the EU's declared values like solidarity, democracy, and security, etc., and its institutional capacity and political willingness to defend and advance their values under conditions of war and maybe geopolitical pressure. Yes.
Thank you, Ruslan. Now let's talk about our second article with Dmytro Boiko and about Euroscepticism. So how does Euroscepticism in Ukraine and in candidate countries at all fundamentally differ from Euroscepticism within the EU itself?
Thank you for your question. Obviously, the key difference between the Euroscepticism inside the EU is usually a debate from within the system, while in candidate countries, it is a debate about access to that system. And in EU member states, Euroscepticism tends to target specific EU policies, EU institutions, or limits on national sovereignty. But but it is grounded in a already secured membership and a sense of belonging to the Union, to the EU. In candidate countries, and especially in Ukraine before 2022, Euroscepticism follows a different logic. It does not reject European integration as such, but question its conditions, the conditions of Euro integration, costs of Euro integration, and sincerity of the EU. It is less an ideological and more discursive discourse of disappointment, mistrust, and bargaining. Criticism of the EU often coexists with a declared pro-European orientation. One can support integration while claiming that Europe does not really want us, or Euro integration demands too much, or benefits at Ukraine expense for Euro integration. And in this sense, Euroscepticism in candidate countries is not strictly anti-European at all. Rather, it is a way of problematization unequal and asymmetric relations between the EU and those who seeking to join to the EU.
Mm-hmm. In your article, why do you treat Euroscepticism not as an ideology, but a situational and adaptive discourse? Why do you choose discourse analysis for this study rather than service or quantitative methods?
Thank you for this point. We treat Euroscepticism not as an ideology because, especially in Ukraine case, Euroscepticism lacked a stable, coherent, value-based core. It did not offer a consistent alternative vision of the future, no alternative project of the future, whether the geopolitical, economic, or civilization. Instead, what we observed is a set of arguments and rhetoric tools that became activated in specific political and even crisis-driven contexts. Eurosceptic narratives were highly adaptable. They shifted depending on agenda, economic downturns, tensions with the EU, internal conflicts between different elite groups, or some reforms introduced under the banner of European standards. And the same actor could criticize the EU for economic disadvantages in one context and for imposing alien values or alien worldview in other context. And this point not to ideological consistency. It's some kind of discursive flexibility. And also this adaptability of Euroscepticism became especially visible after 2022, because open Eurosceptic rhetorics mostly largely disappeared from public space, from media, not because underlying attitudes necessarily changed, or because of just ending of Euroscepticism, but because of the new context that made such statements politically and morally unacceptable. And this is also the additional side of discursive nature, discursive sense of Euroscepticism, not as ideology.
Mhm. What arguments and persuasive strategies were most commonly used in Eurosceptic discourse?
Arguments in Ukrainian Eurosceptic discourse before 2022, and in our analysis, we took period from 2014 to 2022 because of it may be the most visible and most active stage of Eurosceptic evolution or development. And in this period, Ukrainian Eurosceptic discourse relatively stable had a relatively stable set of arguments and persuasive strategies that organized around several core claims, core ties. First, there was the argument that EU does not really need Ukraine. So the European Union was portrayed as unwilling to accept Ukraine and interested only in cheap labor or raw materials. Second point is for Euroscepticism that Eurosceptics emphasize the excessive cost of European integration, unacceptable cost of European integration for Ukraine. EU standards were depicted as destructive for the economy, social welfare, and national sovereignty. While Ukrainian authorities were portrayed as that they are ready to pay any price to satisfy Brussels. Third argument, third tie of sense is that economic arguments played a central role, and the EU was framed as an economically disadvantageous partner for Ukraine, and whereas alternative forms of cooperation, especially with one big neighbor country for us, were presented as more rational and more beneficial for Ukraine in that period.
Mhm.
A separate cluster focused on so-called alien values and European values as alien alias with and this whole block of this system of collage of values reduced only to the imposition of cultural and gender norms particularly LGBTQ plus related agendas. And in terms of these argumentative strategies, the main tool was an emotional and populist technique. Maybe were a lot of emotional techniques dominated over rational calculation. At first, irony, sarcasm, mockery, and a lot of rhetorical means that maybe manipulate the massive consciousness in the way of sarcastic and gaming nature, rather the constructive or a coherent alternative vision it was possible, but it wasn't a common way. So at first, to distract the European picture, European perspective, but no alternative instead. That European picture was proposed by this Ukrainian Euroscepticism in that period.
Mhm. And what happened to Euroscepticism in post-2022 Ukraine? Has it disappeared or has it simply gone underground?
Oh, it's a very a perspective question for new researchers, because of during the war we have no opportunity to conduct real measures of Ukrainian both discourse or ideological situation during the war, because of many effects, such as spiral of silence or etc. When the real position of each citizen can be hidden, and not should, but it with a big chance could be hidden from the researcher. So our our assessment of Euroscepticism during this period is very hypothetical. We argue that Euroscepticism in Ukraine after 2022 has not disappeared, but has been pushed out of the public sphere. Its absence from media and political rhetorics in primarily the result, or not the result of radical change the context because of the full-scale war. And it's the way of adaptation of at first of Ukrainian political elites that now cannot use this tool, Eurosceptic card, because of a new context, and they should find alternative tools to criticize or to struggle with authorities, with the government. Under this condition, open criticism of the EU became socially and morally unacceptable, as I taught before, because of the obvious fact that the EU may be the main ally of Ukraine in in nowadays. And this does not mean that earlier doubts, fears, or critical arguments simply vanished. Rather, they lost their legitimacy as a publicly articulated position. We suggest that elements of Euroscepticism discourse may still persist in hidden or transformed form. For example, as internal criticism of the pace, conditions, or asymmetry of European integration, or in discussion about double standards or unequal partnership between Ukraine and the EU. But as the main strategy for near decades, the Euroscepticism cannot be acceptable for Ukrainian policy. In this sense, Euroscepticism has not disappeared as a potential stance, but has entered as a latent Euroscepticism has entered its latent phase, awaiting new political and social conditions for rearticulation. But the possible rearticulation of Euroscepticism also may be external for Ukraine because of, for example, EU internal processes of disintegration, maybe new Brexit, but not only and any other exit from the EU can be the starting point of reactivation Ukrainian Euroscepticism. But without this specific changes, specific challenges, new challenges for EU integration, Euroscepticism could be hidden and could be in its latent phase.
Thank you, Dmytro. Actually, it was my last question for our today's discussion. Ruslan, thank you very much as well. Hope to see your articles published in the near future. It was a great pleasure meeting you. Hope to see you in person soon as well.
Yes, thank you very much.
Also hope that our articles will be published. Thank you, Dr. Orlov, for your great questions, and see you in our future.
Thanks.
Yes.